afternoon, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to this special call meeting for the purpose of discussing recommendations and or options for the return of our K-5 students to the classroom based on the latest information provided by the governor last week.
So, Madam Chair, before we get started with the presentation that we had, I have asked the board, I've asked our Health Department Director, Mr. David Stanley, to come and just kind of give us an overview of where we are as a county as it pertains to COVID cases and percentage of positives that we have, not only in the district, but how we compare in the region. Mr. Stanley, if you would
Thank you, Dr.
briefly give
Oates.
us that information.
Members of our Board of Education, thank you for inviting me to come and talk to you today. Can you hear me okay through this mask? I'll try it for a little while. I'll try to project and see where that goes, and if it needs to, I'll remove it. Right now, when we look at our case counts in Brunswick County, we are at 1,563 cases as of today, with 26 deaths. And when we contrast that to North Carolina as a whole, North Carolina stands at 195,549 cases and 3,286 deaths. When we look at our region, as far as the number of cases, the highest in our region, if we look at counties that surround us, you look at Horry County, which stands at 9,875 cases as of today. And then our next in line, and you can imagine our most populous areas in our region, New Hanover County at 4,304 cases. County with the least kind of in our region is Pender at 907 cases. If we look at our growth rate of cases since June the 2nd, which is really when in our region we started seeing an uptick in cases, Horry County has had the most growth in those cases in our region, followed closely behind New Hanover County. Horry County is at 2,075% increase in cases, and New Hanover County is at 2,020% as of today. So where do we fall in that? Brunswick County is at 1,321% is where we fall in there. Of note, since I spoke with y'all last time, we have seen a downward trend in the number of positive cases that are being reported to us. When you look at probably the height of the summer, where we saw the cases was about the first 2 weeks of July. We were seeing over 20 cases a day on average that were being reported to us. And when you contrast that to what we've been seeing in Brunswick County for the first 2 weeks of August, last 2 weeks of August, and then again the first 2 weeks of September, we've fallen to about 5 or 6 cases per day. So 20 plus cases a height in July. Today we're getting about 5 or 6 cases for Brunswick County. We've also seen that trend throughout the region. Horry County is not reporting as many positive cases as they were during the height of the season. Same thing for some of other counties like Pender and Columbus. I didn't throw New Hanover in there because we have seen a few more cases reported in New Hanover over the last 3 or 4 weeks than we've been seeing. Some of those, of course, I hate to speculate, but could be related to colleges and going back into session and so on and so forth. And I think they put out some information regarding that in New Hanover County. For us, I think that's a positive sign that we've seen a decrease in the number of cases that are reported to us today. But again, we just can't look at the cases. The other thing that's important when we're looking at public health metrics, at infection rates, is the notion of percent positives. Because total cases, like we've explained the last time I was before you all, can be explained that there's fewer people are being tested. And so we also have to look at not only your total cases, but of the people that are being tested, what percent of those are shown to be positive. And during the height of the summer season, that July timeframe, I was telling you we were getting 20 plus cases a day. The county was at sometimes higher than 8% for Brunswick County, but somewhere around 7 or 8% during that time frame. So 8% of those that were getting the test we would show as being positive. Right now where we're at, and we have been as low as 2% in some areas, but we are about 3%, 3.5% is where that number has been bouncing around really for the last 2 or 3 weeks as far as the percent positivity rate. We have also seen that trend, just like the reduction in cases we talked about in the region. We've also seen that trend in percent positives in a lot of our county partners as well. Speaking about Horry, Columbus, Pender, their percent positivity rates have also declined. And so what is the target? You know, when you look from a percent positive standpoint, what our state DHHS, Division of Public Health, has put out is they have said from the get-go that they would like to see a percent positive rate of about 5%. And we believe that things will stabilize with the pandemic. You can keep your arms around outbreaks and keeping and looking and trying to do what you can for mitigation efforts to get to 5%. Well, if you look at the state numbers, during the same July time frame we were talking about, they were 8+%, sometimes 9 to 10%, 11% on some occasions. Well, they now are around 5%, a little over 5% on some days, depending on the day that you look. So I think, again, that's a positive sign on reduction in the number of total cases that we're reporting and reduction in the percent positivity rates that we're seeing for the testing that's being done. And so, again, I think those are positive signs. And as Dr. Oates, you started with, we've got some additional information and news from the governor's office about the reason why we are here today. And they also pointed to some of those metrics and some of the press briefings that they did last week. And so that's pretty much all that I had. If there's something else that I can add of value, I'll be happy to try.
Any questions, Mr. Stanley?
I think I'll have some. Can you hang around?
Yes, sir.
Because once they do their presentation, I think I'm going to have some relating to classroom and buses, and
Yes,
just
sir.
want your opinion on some things, if you could say.
I'll be glad to.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
So we'll begin with the presentation. It is relatively brief. I'm going to try to get directly to the point. Of course, with the governor's announcement last week, we have 2 options before us. Those 2 options are simply to remain on our current schedule until the end of the semester, which was the AB schedule, or option 2, which is to allow the students that are currently on the AB schedule that are in elementary school to return to school 5 days a week for face-to-face instruction per the governor's announcement. Some things I just wanted to talk about with option 2, of course, health and safety. I think we've known it's a foregone conclusion, and we've spoke about this early on when we were even beginning to plan for the upcoming school year, the benefit of having our elementary students, at least our elementary students, in school face-to-face. I can remember distinctly at a board meeting informing you of the benefits of face-to-face instruction for our elementary kids, learning how to read at an early age, getting those foundational skills, and not only that, the socialization skills that are needed for students to be in school with other kids. So here they will benefit instructionally and emotionally by being able to come into the schools face-to-face for 5 days as they typically would. One of the things to point out, and this may be another question that Mr. Stanley can expound on a little later, with the governor's announcement, the social distancing requirements are less restrictive in Plan A than they are in Plan B. If you remember in Plan B, there is a 6-foot social distancing requirement. Now in Plan A, and again going with his announcement, it is basically less restrictive and being able to do almost as best you can with social distancing in the classrooms. In talking with our operations folks today, if we were to do this, I think the best that we would be able to do as far as if we were to get kids back into the schools, would be at best a 3 feet distancing space between children. But with the health and safety with this, masks are still required. They're not recommended, they are required for staff and students. And keep in mind that we have already put in place many safe protocols, the hand washing and the sanitizing machines outside the classroom, and making sure that this is part of the day-to-day happenings within the classrooms as well. So those are some of the health and safety issues that we would look at when it comes to returning to school. And option 2, transportation. This is one that is interesting to me because the DHHS does recommend that even if students were to come back 5 days a week face-to-face, the recommendation is to continue a reduced capacity on school buses. Again, as I said, that's interesting to me because the governor's announcement would allow for elementary students to come back fully into the classrooms, but at the same time say that the buses would have to have reduced capacity. Now, in talking with our transportation department, having students come back face to face and adhering to this recommendation, again, it's a recommendation, would be difficult to pull off the routes without having to create double routes or reduce the amount of instructional time. Now, Mr. Willis is here, and he can expound on that if there's more that you want to add to that, but it's just, it poses an interesting position.
It does. Looking at the 92 of the elementary routes that we have right now currently running with the AB, it would require 57 of those to be double routes. And that's an additional route to the elementary routes that are running with a 24 capacity label on the buses still. Like I had shared, I recommend that if at all possible, if we change that to 2 kids per seat, which would be 48 kids on a school bus, that would make it much more manageable to continue to do it the way we're doing it now. But if we stay at 24, it just really puts a strain on our department not to incur extra costs by running double routes, fuel costs because you're going to have to run 2 routes, and the additional problems that it causes with kids becoming to school late in the morning and then having to leave the schools late in the afternoon. So the limited capacity affects probably transportation, a lot. We're keeping it at 24 kids.
What's the cost? Do you have a cost estimate?
I don't, not at this point.
And that is a recommendation?
That is a recommendation.
We could put the 48 on.
You could put the 48 on.
That is correct. Looking at staff, one of the things that we talked about as cabinet is the possible closing of the employee benefit of the learning lab that we have at the elementary schools by bringing back the elementary students full time. And in addition to that, I think the obvious is, of course, some of the cautions that many of our elementary teachers may have about being in their classrooms with all of the students. I know that I've talked to some teachers. It's kind of a mixed bag at this point. You have some who are definitely wanting to come back, and then you have others who have some valid concerns, and I totally understand that. But in looking at the protocols we have in place, the requirement for masks, and any other type of safety protocols we can handle, we should be able to, if we do things what I call a common sense approach, we should be okay in bringing these students back. Something to keep in mind is that we still do have class size limitations, K-3. That has not changed, and these class size mandates apply to the remote learning environment as well. And that's, I think that's something that a lot of people don't realize. With the remote learning, you would think that you could just add students and continue to add students as you like. However, these class size mandates still apply to even the remote environments that we have. And one of the limitations that we definitely want to focus on is our folks who are currently in our remote learning environments. If those that are in the remote learning environment currently, those that signed up and have the understanding that they were going to be in remote learning until the end of the semester, if they were allowed to come back now and say, I want to do face-to-face, one of the consequences of that would possibly be having a different teacher than you would have had you stayed in remote. So for the time that these folks have been in remote, they've had a consistent teacher. If they were to opt to come face-to-face, they would then be looking at probably a new teacher for those students.
When's the end of the grading period?
The end of the grading period is the 16th, I think it is, but we would start the new grading, actually started on the 21st. The 20th is a work day, I think it is, a teacher work day.
So if we were to keep them on remote until that point, the ones that wanted to come back from remote,
For the grading period?
If we were to start them at the beginning of a new grading period, would that be easier
That would
on
be
staff? And
much easier on staff than allowing them to come back on the 5th.
Are we considering that as a final option, that you remote? If you decide to go to remote, you stay on remote for the remainder of the year if you decide to come back? Because we keep opening it up and closing it, and when I spoke to principals the last 2 days, they're telling me it's a nightmare
It is.
planning-wise because they have teachers moving back and forth. They have to try to fill these rooms. So so you were saying we would set this as, if you choose remote, you're on remote this year?
That's
and
correct. Well, are you saying the year or semester?
I don't know, we would have to decide that.
Correct.
If we
Because
want
right now, the public is under the impression of the
Semester.
semester. So I would keep it as semester and not extend it for the year.
unless we reopen the entire survey again to see who wants to come back for 5 days a week, right? And then they could opt out for a second semester or, okay.
So of course, that date is October 5th. That is, it can't start before that date. So anything that would be decided today would begin on October 5th. But here are some considerations and some of these that we've talked about already. You know, the families who've opted for full semester 100% remote, will they have the opportunity to return to face-to-face? And if so, or would we stick with what has been mentioned here today as the end of the grading period? Will families who selected AB have the opportunity to move to 100% remote? That goes back to what I talked about with class size. Currently, we have 1,615 elementary students who have opted for remote learning. And to bring any more in, if I'm not mistaken, Ms. White, are we close to capacity as far as class size mandates?
Yes, in our remote classes, and it can be in either way. So no school has a perfect, we always say that no school perfectly fits into a box of 18 or 21 in that manner. So it could be at one school that their face-to-face classes, their AB combined is close to that 21 or at that 21, or it might be the remote classes at 21. Each school is very unique in how their numbers fall out and where their teachers are assigned. This is obviously specific to kindergarten through third grade. With that, in fourth and fifth grade, we have a little more flexibility.
And the last question, of course, would be a deadline set, and again, that goes back to our conversation about if they were allowed to come back, the remote folks want to come back face-to-face, we would definitely need to send out a sign-up form for that and give that a deadline to be completed, so planning could take place immediately, particularly as it pertains to bus routes and any other scheduling that the school level administrators need to do.
So, Dr. Oates, would you then send a survey out to determine how many parents that opted for the full semester originally, how many would be interested in bringing their kids back at the beginning of the second grading period?
That's correct. Once the decision is made here today, we have something that's almost poised and ready to be sent out immediately, and we will set up a deadline for that. Give them ample time. I want to make sure parents have time to make that decision. So it would be more than 2 days. So we could get that information back. And we also want to do it in time enough so we can do adequate planning to be ready for the 5th. So yes, and we also, though, we anticipate with the reopening, if this were to take place, if you voted on that, many students that are not currently in our schools and chose for whatever reason to go to charter schools or go to private schools, we're anticipating them coming back. I've spoken with principals yesterday, and once the governor made this announcement, I know a couple of principals said they were immediately emailed and called from parents who had left and gone to charter schools or private schools saying that if the board votes to open your elementary schools back up, we will be back. So we're anticipating those parents as well.
So Dr. Oates, what's your recommendation?
Well, my recommendation is to allow for K-5 students to return face-to-face October 5th, and giving the folks who want to, that are currently in remote learning, if they wish to come to face-to-face, do that at the 9-week break.
I make a motion we accept that recommendation.
Second.
We have a motion to accept Dr. Oates' recommendation and a second. Any further discussion?
So let me make sure we're clear. We'll start K-5 October 5th.
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 Okay.
And the ones that are on remote will have the option to come back at the end of the grading period. But you're going to set a deadline prior to that for those folks to let us know how many is coming back.
That's correct.
And also ones that they want to stay, we may have more coming back from other schools or whatever. Okay,
That's correct.
I'm good with that.
Okay. Any other comments or discussion?
This will be the final, so this will be the final opt-in, though, to come back until December. We're going to make that clear to the parents that we're
Yes.
not going to play the game in a month from now. I decide I want to pull my
Yeah,
kid
we
back.
can't. This
We can't
transportation
keep
thing's
doing
a
this.
nightmare.
Yeah, we just
It
can't.
is.
But let me ask you this question, and this question I have for you, because we talked about it when we talked about transportation. Are we going to look at, we know what the recommendation is, but in order to carry out getting these students back, we will need to exceed 24 students.
Let me ask David. David,
Yes, sir.
what's the difference in filling a bus and filling a classroom?
I've been trying to do a little bit of research since I heard some of this discussion about the K through 5 classroom in A, and then trying to apply that to the bus. And I think the short answer to your question, there might be a little bit of difference in air circulation and that sort of thing when you're looking at bus versus the classroom. But generally speaking, when you've got folks that in that close proximity, I personally don't see a lot of difference between sitting on a bus that close versus a classroom. What I can do, and I don't know exactly the guidance, I wasn't prepped for that particular question, so I would be glad to take that question back to DHHS and DPH and get a better, more definitive answer on just that with their scientists. But one would think as long as you have K through 5 kids on the bus, i.e. no older kids, and K-5 through kids in the classroom, then it would kind of be looking at the same procedures. So that's my thought, but that's my thought without digging into the guidance and talking with some of the state experts to get you an answer.
Could we defer the answer to that question to allow the health department to work with Mr. Wills to determine that? Bus capacity?
Well, and what I'm wondering too, kind of the segue from K-5 to 612, right now the buses are reduced students for all the routes, correct? So if we're going to double up on the elementary, is there an advantage to doubling up on the K-12? Well, we're looking at only going to be having 15 days of the AB schedule before this starts. So whether there'll be any data or statistics between now and the 15 days of school, in the general population of the school, students, staff that may contract the disease, or the virus. You know, I don't know if it makes sense to, you can't go backwards. But it's like, we'll have 15 days worth of data, you know, as far as infection with the buses. So then after that, if it's safe to go, you know, if we're going K-5 doubling up, would we even consider doubling up the K-12 buses for purposes of transportation as well? Or do we look at that even down the road for next semester?
From the information that I've been able to see so far, and again, you know, I think, you know, there's more research that we need to look at. The changing of the social distancing recommendations really have to do with the age bracket of those kids.
Right.
And
Okay.
so that's the logical thing I've been able to find through those adjustments, and that's why I'm saying to the school bus question, you know, if you're looking at all those K through 5 kids, I personally don't know why there would be a difference.
They're going to be together all day.
Right.
For 40, so the recommendation would be 48 children per bus, which would give them the 3 foot or so space between each child, the same as the classroom. And we won't exceed that. Is that what we're?
And what we have continue to do is temperature check them. And what we, with the help of child nutrition, we're going to put monitors on some of our higher populated routes, so they could help, you know, where the buses have higher capacities, where they could help tempt the kids and get them on there quicker to make it safer. So we would still temperature check those kids so to make it, you know, as safe as possible to increase our capacity.
What would be the highest capacity for a bus under normal circumstances?
72 for elementary age.
Right, okay. So you're still going to be having extra routes regardless, even if you increase it to 48?
We
Probably.
hope not at this point with the
Okay.
numbers.
Okay.
Yeah, with 48, you'll be able to do a
With the
single
remote,
route.
but yeah.
Do we need to amend that motion for the busing?
I think we can approve
I think
the opening and then
we
just approve a
should.
bus amendment, right? The bus number separately.
Mr. Lemon, would you like to amend your motion to include the buses?
No, I think that's a separate issue.
Okay. You guys good with that?
Yes.
Good. Okay, let's go back to the original motion then. That would be to accept Dr. Oates' recommendation that K-5 students return to the classroom on October 5th, and the remote students would, those choosing to do so, would return on October 21st? 21st. Okay, so Mr. Lemon made the motion, Mr.
20th.
20th, okay, it'd be the 20th. Mr. Lemon made the motion, Mr. Benton seconded.
Yes, ma'am.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any
Aye.
opposed? Okay. All 5 members voted in favor, none opposed, motion carried. Now let's look at the bus motion. Mr. Benton, who would like to make that motion?
I make a motion we allow Mr. Willis to fill the buses up to 48 students as necessary to fill our transportation needs.
And the max on the bus is 72 usually, and we can safely do it with 48. I'll second that motion.
Okay, so Mr. Benton has made the motion, and Mr. Miller has seconded.
And that's just for K-5?
Just for K-5.
Yes, ma'am.
Right, K-5.
Any further discussion?
And also that you get the help needed to, like you said, with the heavy traffic areas.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Any
Aye.
opposed? Any opposed? Nope, all 5 have voted in favor, motion carried. Do I have any other concerns or comments at this time that relates to?
I'd just like to applaud them for their, I visited 5 schools in the last 2 days, and I mean, the schools are spotless. Every hallway has a janitor in it pushing down the hallway with wiping door handles, wiping glass, wiping handles. They have somebody in the bathroom. It is just amazing. It's cleaner than a hospital in the schools, and I really was impressed. I have to tell you, the students, people are doing an amazing job, and the kids were so happy to be there. And I know you went and visited as
did.
well.
I visited 2 schools yesterday, and I was absolutely amazed. I mean, it's as Mr. Benton says, it's like a well-oiled machine. Our staff has got their things together. And it's going to show. I think the kids are as safe as they can possibly be at this time.
Well, it's exciting to know that we are going to have some kids in our schools, and I think it's going to do a lot for a lot of reasons. This is our first step, so I'm looking forward to the next steps. We need all of our kids in school.
Yes, we
so
do.
I'm looking forward to the day that we have our schools full. So as soon as we can do that, I'm ready.
Anyone else? I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Mr. Miller made the motion to adjourn. Do I have a second? Ms. Cook has seconded. All in favor? Aye. Ed?
Okay, we got a form.
Okay, he's gone. Motion carried. Thank you.